Welcome to another episode of the Cynical Writer. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that the best way to support this channel is to purchase my books, and I've left some links in the description section in case you're interested. Now, has the internet been beneficial to writers? Well, it really depends. All technologies have good and bad aspects to them. Human beings are very flawed, and we have both good and bad aspects to our nature. So it makes sense that the internet would be both good and bad, depending on how you look at it. And I think that the internet has been beneficial to writers in some ways, and perhaps very unbeneficial to writers in other ways. So it all depends on how you look at it. Of course, the internet has been enormously beneficial to self-published writers, to writers who are trying to go at it independently without being beholden to a traditional publisher. The internet has been enormously helpful in that respect. There aren't any gatekeepers any longer, because it used to be, prior to the internet, a writer had to send out a query letter, or they had to send out a manuscript or a short story, and they would hope that an agent or publisher would agree to publish their book or represent their book or something like that. And they had to rely on basically the whims of a publisher. And, even when I was first getting started in the early 2010s in writing, self-publishing hadn't quite become mainstream yet. Yes, it was a thing in the 2000s, but it still didn't quite have the legitimacy that it does today. Now everyone is self-publishing, and that could be considered both a good and a bad thing. It's good in many ways because people who have unique artistic voices that aren't necessarily commercial, now they can have their voices heard, where it used to be people like that were suppressed. Because you got to remember, publishers aren't interested in quality fiction. They're interested in what will sell. Sometimes people will try to defend the nature of gatekeepers by saying things like, the publishers are keeping out all of the shitty work. Well, here's the thing. If a publisher thinks that a shitty work will sell, then they will gladly publish it. Publishers aren't looking for quality most of the time. They're looking for what will sell. So people need to be aware of that. So in many ways, the internet has liberated authors, because now authors can interact with their audiences directly, and they don't have to go through a publisher. Now, for example, my grandfather, who published a book in 1997, back then, if you wanted to publish a paperback or a hardback, you had to go to a printing company that would print hundreds of copies sometimes of your book, and then you would have to sell them without any direction whatsoever. And very often back then, if a writer wanted to self-publish, I wanted to distribute their self-published books, they would have to go to local libraries, local bookstores. It was a very long and I guess you could say arduous process that often didn't lead anywhere. Now, my grandfather actually managed to sell quite a few books out of state. I don't know exactly how he managed to do it. I know he had some articles written in certain magazines, and he was able to advertise his books that way. But again, it was a very long and painful process for him. Whereas now, publishing is a lot easier, especially when it comes to print on demand and things like that. Now, a book isn't printed unless a customer orders one. So it's just a lot easier with self-publishing. So the internet has been enormously beneficial in that way, and because of that, traditional publishing is in many ways archaic now, and self-publishing is now the norm. Now, of course, there are some negative effects to the internet as well. I mean, for example, because there's so many people self-publishing, there's a lot of noise. So it can be very difficult for writers to have their voices heard when there's just so much chaos, so much noise going on. And because of that, it's very difficult to stand out. Whereas in the past, with traditional publishing, it was a lot easier to get noticed if a publisher decided to take a writer on. But very few publishers actually would do that. Now, of course, one of the negative side effects to the internet is that writers have to deal with trolls and people who want to put them down and to criticize. And that's something that a lot of writers have to deal with that they didn't have to deal with before, because in the past, if a writer received a rejection letter, it was impersonal, and now, and you might say that's worse in some ways, because because very often if a publisher sends a writer a rejection letter, very rarely do they ever actually tell the writer what they thought was actually wrong or why they rejected it. I mean, really, when there's no evidence most of the time that the publisher even read the manuscript. So because of that, writers were left in the dark. But writers now, though, online, they receive a lot. They can receive a lot of hate and from trolls and people like that. And normally, it comes from people who aren't writers themselves. Very often, it comes from people who have private accounts, or people who are just looking to make trouble, because I've noticed that very often if someone actually makes content themselves, either through their writing or through making videos, then they're a lot less likely to be a troll, because if they gain a reputation for being cruel to others, then that could have a very negative effect on their brand. And so it's not pleasant dealing with trolls. In fact, if I actually was wealthy enough that I could hire someone to deal with all of my social media, I would do it. I think it's worth every penny, because it's an enormous waste, I guess you could say, of spirit and of energy dealing with people who really, and most of the time, really haven't done anything with their life, and they're just looking to bring other people down to make themselves feel better. And that is definitely one of the more negative aspects to the internet. But of course, there are also another positive aspect, is because a lot of writers feel like outsiders, and we feel like we don't belong. And a lot of and because creative people are very rare, most people, let's face it, are inherently uncreative. But on the internet, writers can find people who are just like them, and they can get together and form writing groups. And also, if writers who struggle with depression or can find other people who are going through the exact same things that they are going through, that is one of the major benefits to the internet, is because in the past, if a writer, for example, wasn't receiving support from their family, or if their family didn't believe in them or something like that, they didn't really have anywhere else that they could turn to. Whereas now, a writer can find support online, because there are all sorts of people out there in the world, and just because no one believes in you, for example, in your social circle, that doesn't mean that no one will ever believe in you. So the internet has allowed writers to interact with people that they otherwise would never meet. So that is one of the major benefits. Now, of course, one of the negative side effects of the internet is that people who have, I guess you could say, extreme ideas or harmful or dangerous ideas, people who are kind of on the fringe of society, can also get together, and they can reinforce their beliefs, and they can spread misinformation. And that is definitely one of the negative side effects of the internet, is that I guess you could say hate groups can get a lot stronger this way. And I'm not talking about any particular ideology. Such groups exist within all ideologies. And so that is definitely one of the negative side effects of the internet overall. So again, the internet is neither good nor bad. All technologies have both pluses and minuses, and I just think everyone should be aware of that. Well, I hope you enjoyed my speech for today. Next week, I will return with a different topic. Remember, if you would like to support this channel, you can check out my books in the description section. Don't forget to subscribe, and until next time, goodbye.